The Kiss. Rampo Edogawa. 1. These days, Yamana Sōzō was walking on air. An indescribable warmth, soft, rosy, and fragrant seemed to envelop him at all times. Whether he was sitting at his battered government office desk, diligently working, or eating square-shaped rice from his aluminum lunchbox atop that same desk, or dashing out the office gates at precisely 4 o'clock like a gust of wind beneath the rows of willows lining the street, this buoyant atmosphere always floated gently around him. The reason was simple. About a month ago, Yamana Sōzō had taken a bride, and not just any bride, but the very woman he had long loved. One day, just as the clock struck 4, he hurried home with the giddy eagerness of a schoolboy released from class, ignoring his section chief, Murayama, who was still shuffling papers across his cluttered desk. He bolted from the office, heading straight for home. Surely his dear Ohana, with her bright red headscarf, would be sitting by the long brazier in the parlor, waiting for him with everything already prepared, chuckling softly to herself. Ohana always laughed so easily, as she sat before the dinner tray. The moment she heard the front lattice door open, she'd leap out like a rabbit to greet him. She'd be waiting eagerly just for that. How adorable she was. Though he didn't think all this in so many words, if one were to diagram Sōzō's heart as he walked home, it would look just like that. Maybe today I'll sneak up and surprise her. As he neared the gate to his home, Sōzō grinned to himself. Moving on tiptoe, he slowly slid open the lattice door, carefully opened the inner shoji door without a sound, and slipped off his shoes as silently as he could, creeping toward the parlor. Maybe I should clear my throat with an ahem right around here. No, wait. When she's alone, I wonder what she's doing. Let's peek for just a moment. Peering through a tear in the shoji screen into the parlor, what he saw made him freeze, his face turning pale. For in that moment, an utterly bizarre scene was unfolding before his eyes. 2. Just as he'd imagined, Ohana was indeed sitting before the long brazier. The dinner tray, covered with a cloth, had already been set out. But crucially, Ohana was not smiling or chuckling at all. Far from it, in fact, she wore such a grave expression. So tense, it was almost as if she were about to cry. She held a photograph in her hands and was kissing it, hugging it. It was an unbearable sight. Yamana Sōzō's heart skipped a beat as a terrible suspicion struck him. His chest pounded like a frantic drum. He quietly stepped back 2 or 3 tatami mats, then deliberately stomped forward with heavy, angry footsteps, slid the paper door open with a loud clatter, and barked, "Hey, I'm home." He dropped himself down heavily on the other side of the brazier, with an air that all but said, "Why aren't you here to greet me?" "Oh." With a startled cry, Ohana hurriedly stuffed the photograph into her sash. Her face flushed red, then turned pale, stammering in panic. Eventually, she calmed herself enough to say, "Oh my, I didn't realize at all. I'm so sorry." Even the overly demure way she spoke seemed like an act to Sōzō. And seeing how she had hidden the photograph, he was now certain. Until just before opening the door, part of him had been vainly hoping, what if it's a picture of me? But no. From the way she turned pale and tried to conceal it, it clearly wasn't. It had to be his photo. That man Murayama, the section chief. And Sōzō had good reason for this suspicion. His new wife, Ohana, was a distant relative of Murayama and had lived in his house for quite some time. Through that connection, she had ended up marrying Sōzō. Naturally, it had been the section chief himself who arranged the match. Murayama wasn't that much older than Sōzō, and though he had a wife, she was notoriously unattractive. If one started down the path of doubt, who knew what might turn up? Sōzō now wondered whether he had simply been handed down a used prize, so to speak. And there was another thing that bothered him: Ohana's frequent visits to the Murayama household. It had only been a month since their marriage, yet even Sōzō, from what he knew, could count 4 or 5 visits. She'd even returned home late at night on some occasions. The more he thought about it, the more furious he became, furious enough to burst, especially since he was prone to fits of jealousy to begin with. Still, he managed to keep up appearances during dinner. He didn't chat with her as usual, but neither could he retreat to his study until he knew the true nature of that photo. So the two of them sat awkwardly, casting uneasy glances at one another. Whose photograph is that, anyway? The question kept rising to his throat, but he forced it back each time, silently watching her every move. Jealous as he was, Sōzō had a rather devious streak. He figured that when they went to bed, she would definitely hide that photograph somewhere. He intended to find out where and dig it up later. 3. Before long, Ohana rose silently and slipped out of the room. She didn't head in the direction of the toilet. Seemed she was going toward the storeroom. Sōzō himself was just a humble clerk with nothing to show, but thanks to his late father, a former retainer of the shogunate, their house was old yet spacious, with things like a large, old-fashioned storeroom. So, she's planning to hide it in a dresser? Even that storeroom had several chests of drawers. Once it was stowed away, he wouldn't know which one. Still, the only way to find out was to follow her. So Sōzō stood up quietly and crept after his wife like a shadow. As he suspected, she had gone into the storeroom. Just as she entered, she was still fumbling with the locks on one of the dressers. Which drawer, in which chest is she hiding it in? He wondered, pressing his eye to a tier in the paper door and peeking in. The room was lit by a 5-bulb lamp shared by 2 adjoining rooms, and the hole in the shoji was just big enough for one eye, so figuring out her exact movements was difficult. Still, he managed to determine at least that she placed the object into the uppermost small drawer on the far left of the dresser, directly in front of the door. After tossing the item in, she slammed it shut with a bang and looked ready to rush back toward him. If she catches me watching, I'm finished. Panicked, Sōzō darted back to the living room. He lit a cigarette and coolly took a puff, pretending he'd been sitting there the whole time. Then came the usual awkward standoff, the two of them glaring at each other. But that couldn't go on forever. At some point, without either of them really choosing to, they exchanged 2 or 3 lines of flat, tasteless small talk. Eventually, the clock struck 9. Sōzō went to bed a little earlier than usual, planning his next move. In the middle of the night, after carefully listening to Ohana's breathing and confirming she was sound asleep, he sat up in bed, wrapped his sleeping robe around himself, and stealthily slipped out of the room. His destination, of course, was the storeroom. He finally reached it, heart pounding, and pulled open the uppermost left drawer of the front dresser, one he'd marked earlier. His hands trembled as he opened it. There it was. No mistake. Stacked in the drawer were over 10 photographs, both large and small. Sitting smugly on the very top was a half-body portrait of Section Chief Murayama. Still, just to be certain, Sōzō steadied his shaking hands and examined each photo one by one. Aside from that single image of Murayama, the rest were all family photos of Ohana. There was no longer any room for doubt. It was exactly what he had feared. Damn it. What am I going to do? Humiliated, enraged, and shivering from the cold, Sōzō clenched his teeth in fury. 4. The next morning, without a word, Sōzō snatched the lunchbox from Ohana's hands and rushed off to work in a fury. Even seeing the faces of his coworkers irritated him to no end. Just thinking about how they bowed and scraped before that smug section chief for their meager government salaries made him want to punch every last one of them. Without so much as a greeting, he sat down heavily at his desk, scowling in silence. His bloodshot eyes were fixed on the empty chair at the section chief's desk. Before long, the ever-stylish section chief Murayama arrived, carrying a large leather briefcase under his arm. He offered a quick nod in return as the others saluted him from their seats, then sat down. His briefcase hit the desk with a thud. Naturally, Sōzō did not salute. He simply glared at Murayama with a burning intensity. Once the chief had finished tidying up his desk, he cleared his throat and awkwardly called out, "Yamana, a moment, please." Sōzō nearly ignored him, but realized he couldn't go that far. Grudgingly, he stood and walked over to Murayama's desk. Though he made no polite inquiries like, "What can I do for you?" he simply stood there in stony silence. The section chief, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface, began scolding him as usual. "This report is a mess. You've left out the average rate heights, the most important figure. Honestly, Yamana?" Looking down, Sōzō saw that the mistake was indeed his. Normally, he would have accepted the reprimand quietly, but not today. He was in no mood. Without answering, he glared back at his superior. "What do you think this report is supposed to be? You've included the totals so meticulously, those aren't even necessary. What we need is the average rate. Surely that much should be obvious." "Oh, is that so?" Sōzō suddenly shouted in a voice so loud it made everyone jump. He snatched the papers from Murayama's hands and stormed back to his desk. The section chief, who had been preparing to launch into a long, dull lecture, blinked in confusion. Back at his desk, Sōzō began writing furiously. At first glance, it might have seemed like he was dutifully correcting the report, but that wasn't it at all. He unfolded a blank sheet of paper and with bold strokes wrote the words, "Letter of Resignation." 5. The next day, Sōzō returned home triumphantly before noon, despite it being only 11 o'clock, having thrown his childishly scrawled resignation, letter written in bold strokes, like a schoolboy's best handwriting, onto the section chief's desk. It felt good. "Ohana, come here for a moment." He plopped down heavily in front of the usual long brazier, ready for a serious confrontation. After what had happened the previous night, Ohana was already visibly nervous. "Oh, you're home early. Are you feeling unwell?" "No, nothing wrong with my health. I quit my job today. Just know that. The reason I left is because I had a clash with Murayama. So from now on, I want you to completely stop going to the Murayama household. I absolutely insist on it." "Oh." She managed that much, but couldn't find a second word to follow. "And one more thing," he added casually. "You have a photo of Murayama, don't you? Go and get it for me." With his harsh tone, she couldn't very well refuse. Ohana reluctantly brought the photo. Sōzō, without hesitation, tore it to shreds right in front of her and tossed it into the brazier, watching it burn with a look of deep satisfaction. At that point, even Ohana couldn't pretend not to understand. So that's what this is all about, she realized. Her expression shifted. She finally saw what he was getting at. And now, as women do when cornered, she began employing every trick in the book, sulking, crying, shifting moods until at last, she managed to get Sōzō to confess that he had been spying on her. There, he thought. Now she can't say a word in her defense. I even saw where she hid the photo. There's no getting around that. Confident in his victory, Sōzō sat calmly, waiting to see her reaction. But to his astonishment, Ohana didn't break into tears or fall to the floor sobbing. Instead, she suddenly burst into giggles. That soft, tinkling laugh he knew so well filled the room. Oh my, and here I was, wondering what had gotten into you. You're too much. Murayama and me? Honestly, you're terribly suspicious, aren't you? That photo, well, actually, it was yours. And with that, she blushed and quickly covered her face. My photo? Nonsense. Don't try to fool me. That won't work. I followed you all the way to the storeroom and watched exactly where you put it. In that drawer, there wasn't a single photo of me or any other man except Murayama. Which makes it all the stranger. You say there were lots of photos in that drawer? You must have been dreaming. There was only one photo yours. I keep it carefully, tucked inside the document box in the drawer. Which drawer did you look in, anyway? That small top left drawer of the dresser directly in front of the entrance. Oh, the front dresser? That's strange. Last night, I put your photo in the dresser on the left side of the room. Same position top, left drawer but an entirely different dresser. That's impossible. You're trying to cover it up again. I peeked through the little hole in the shoji, and from that angle, there's no way I could have seen the left side dresser. It had to be the one in front. Even if I was in a hurry, there's no way I'd mistake the direction, like that the front and the left are entirely different. Well, that's odd. It's not odd. You're just trying to bluff your way out with ridiculous lies. Stop with the nonsense already. But no buts. There's no way I was mistaken about what I saw. And so the argument turned strange. The husband insisted it was the dresser along the front wall, while the wife claimed it was the one on the left wall. Their assertions differed by a full 90 degrees. 6. Ah, I've got it. Suddenly, Ohana cried out. Come here, please. Just take a look. I figured it out. She tugged insistently at his sleeve, and Sōzō, having no choice, followed her to the storeroom. Here, this is it. It has to be. What she pointed to was a new Western-style wardrobia modern piece they had purchased at the end of last year, using his temporary bonus and some accrued interest from a savings deposit. And what of it? You see now? Look, this mirror on the door. The door must have been opened just like this, positioned right in front of the hole in the shoji. So the dresser on the left side of the room was reflected in the mirror, making it appear as if it were directly in front of you. Indeed, if the mirrored door had been opened at a 45-degree angle toward the shoji hole, it would have reflected the left side dresser in such a way that it looked like it was placed right in front. Given that the two dressers looked quite similar, the mistake was entirely understandable, especially under the dim electric light and in such a rush. Could it be I made a blunder? Sōzō felt deflated by the realization. If he had jumped to the wrong conclusion, and it was, in fact, his own photo that Ohana had kissed and hugged out of longing, then he had made an outrageous mistake. In a moment when he should have been glowing with happiness, he had flown into a blind rage and gone so far as to hand in his resignation irreversible now. Thus, the tables turned. With her position dramatically reversed, Ohana now burst into genuine tears. What are you going to do now? Quitting your job? In this economy, it's not like there's another one waiting for you, and it's not as if we can live comfortably without work. You've been so reckless. And as for me visiting the Murayama, you think I did that for fun? I only did it for you, hoping to help your career. Do you think I wanted to keep going over to that house? You don't even know what I go through." She wept. She reproached. She lamented. Oh, how she lamented. Yamana Sōzō had nothing to say now. More than that, he was at a complete loss as to what to do with himself going forward. Ah, jealousy truly is a dreadful thing. He sighed deeply in his heart. But, dear readers, consider this. A man, no matter how petty he may seem, is in the end nothing more than a well-meaning fool. And a woman, no matter how innocent and naive she appears on the surface, often harbors a natural cunning deep within her heart. Even this Ohana was she really only the simple girl we've seen so far in this tale? One must wonder, what if, just what if, the whole mirror trick was her own invention? And what if the photo she kissed and embraced was indeed that of Section Chief Murayama after all? Well, be that as it may, Yamana Sōzō being a man lacked the insidious suspicion required to pursue the thought that far.